The planet below had been called Ethori 7. 3 billion of her people had lived there just 2 weeks ago. They had built cities of crystal and light. They had raised families. They had believed they were safe. Now there was only fire. The Vorathak swarm had come without warning. Their ships had filled the sky like a dark cloud, and then the harvesting had begun. The Vorathaks did not conquer. They did not enslave. They simply consumed. Every living thing on the planet had been turned into food for the swarm. The oceans had been drained. The forests had been stripped bare. Even the soil had been taken. Velkith pressed her four-fingered hand against the cold glass and felt tears running down her silver face. This was the fourth Ethori world to fall. Her species had numbered 20 billion when the invasion began. Now barely 6 billion remained. Scattered across their last 3 colonies, they would not last another month. She turned away from the window and walked to the communication chamber. Her advisors were waiting for her there, their faces filled with fear and doubt. They knew what she was planning to do. They thought she was insane. Perhaps she was. "The Galactic Assembly has responded to our latest request," said her chief advisor, a tired old male named Kethril. "They have offered to send observers to document the situation." "Observers?" Velkith repeated. The word tasted like poison. "Our people are being eaten alive, and they want to send observers. They say the Vorathaks have never attacked a core world. They believe the swarm will stop once they have consumed the outer territories." "The outer territories? You mean us?" Velkith laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We are acceptable losses to them. Our entire species is an acceptable loss." Kethril lowered his head. He had no argument to offer. The Galactic Assembly was old and slow and afraid. They had built their civilization on diplomacy and trade, not war. Their combined military forces numbered less than 5,000 ships. Most of those had never fired a weapon in anger. The Vorathaks had 12,000 warships and 10,000 years of conquest behind them. No species had ever defeated them. No species had ever survived them. But there was one species that might be different. Velkith pulled up a holographic display. It showed a small section of space at the edge of the galaxy, marked in red, the quarantine zone. Inside that zone was a single solar system with a single inhabited planet, Earth, home of the humans. "You cannot be serious," Kethril said when he saw the display. "The humans are savages. They spent their entire history killing each other. The Assembly quarantined them for good reason. The Assembly quarantined them because they were afraid," Velkith replied. "The humans developed nuclear weapons before they even left their own planet. They built warships while they were still fighting among themselves. The Assembly looked at them and saw monsters." "And you see something different?" Velkith studied the display. The data on humanity was limited, but what existed was remarkable. In just 200 years, they had gone from their first primitive spacecraft to a fleet of thousands. They had colonized their entire solar system. They had built weapons that made the Assembly's finest technology look like children's toys, and they had stopped fighting each other. After centuries of war, they had somehow found peace. All that military might, all that violent energy was now sitting idle, waiting. "I see a species that knows how to fight," Velkith said quietly. "I see a species that has been preparing for war their entire existence. The Vorathaks have never faced anything like them. No one has. The Assembly will never approve contact. I am not asking for their approval." The journey to the quarantine zone took 6 days. Velkith spent most of that time reviewing everything her people knew about humanity. She studied their history, their wars, their weapons. She learned about their strange customs and their fierce loyalty to their own kind. She learned about something they called honor, something else they called revenge. The more she learned, the more afraid she became. Not of the humans themselves, but of what she was about to do. She was going to ask monsters for help. She was going to beg predators to fight on behalf of prey. But her people were dying. She had no other choice. When her ship reached the edge of the quarantine zone, she stopped and transmitted a message on all frequencies. She identified herself. She explained the situation. She asked, as humbly as she could, for humanity to help her people. Then she waited. The response came in less than an hour. A human face appeared on her view screen. It belonged to a female with dark skin and gray hair, cut very short. Her eyes were hard and cold, like stones at the bottom of a frozen river. She wore a uniform covered in medals and symbols that Velkith did not recognize. "Ambassador Velkith," the human said. Her voice was calm and controlled. "I am Admiral Kiro Okonkwo of the United Earth Defense Force. We have received your message." Velkith felt her hearts pounding in her chest. "Admiral, thank you for responding. I know my request is unusual, but my people are desperate. The Vorathak swarm has already destroyed 4 of our worlds. We have nowhere else to turn." The Admiral nodded slowly. "We know we have been watching. Velkith felt a chill run through her body. "You knew about the invasion?" "We have been monitoring galactic communications since before the quarantine was established. We know about the Vorathaks. We know about the Assembly's refusal to act. We know about every world that has fallen." The Admiral paused. "We have been waiting for someone to ask for help." Velkith did not know what to say. The humans had known. They had watched billions die and done nothing. But even as anger rose in her chest, she realized the truth. The quarantine had forbidden contact. The humans had been bound by laws they had not made, waiting for permission they had never been given, until now. "Will you help us?" Velkith asked. Her voice trembled.
"Right, please."
"We have nothing to offer you. We cannot pay you. We can only beg." Admiral Okonkwo smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of something dangerous that had finally been let off its chain. "Ambassador, humanity does not fight for payment. We fight because it is right." She turned slightly, and Velkith saw what was behind her through the bridge windows. Ships, warships, hundreds of them, stretching out into the darkness of space. And beyond them, she could see more. Thousands more. They were black and red and covered in weapons. Their hulls were sharp and angular, designed not just for function but for fear. They looked like the nightmares her people told their children about. "The cavalry is coming," Admiral Okonkwo said. Velkethis. Translators struggled with the word. Cavalry, an ancient human term for mounted warriors who rode to the rescue of those in need. "How many ships do you have?" Velkith whispered. The Admiral's smile grew wider. "Enough." She cut the transmission, and a moment later, the quarantine zone lit up with the light of 42,000 engines activating at once. The human fleet began to move, and the stars themselves seemed to tremble. Velkith watched them come, and for the first time in months, she felt something she had forgotten existed. Hope the Galactic Assembly had not known fear for 3,000 years. They were the rulers of civilized space. They controlled trade routes and resources. They decided which species could join their ranks and which would be left in the darkness. But on this day, fear came to them. Counselor Drethmer of the Veloci hegemony was the first to see the sensor readings. He was an old creature, covered in thick scales that had turned gray with age. His people had ruled the galaxy for 11,000 years. They had the largest military in the Assembly, 800 warships that had never known defeat. He had believed nothing could threaten them. Now he stared at his display screen and felt his blood turn. "Cold, this cannot be correct," he said to the technician beside him. "Run the scan again." The technician did as commanded. The results came back the same. 40-2,000 warships had just entered civilized space. They were coming from the quarantine zone. They were moving fast. The humans had arrived. Within minutes. The great chamber of the Galactic Assembly was filled with chaos. 112 species had gathered here, representatives from every corner of known space. They shouted and screamed and demanded answers. Some called for immediate military response. Others called for evacuation. A few simply stood in silence, too shocked to speak. "Hi, Chancellor Morathan." A tall being with 6 arms and skin like polished wood raised his hands for quiet. It took a long time for the noise to stop. "We must remain calm," he said. His voice echoed through the chamber. "The humans have not attacked. They have not made threats. We do not yet know their intentions. Their intentions are obvious, shouted a delegate from the Kreth Dominion. They have sent a war fleet into our space. This is an invasion. It is not an invasion. The voice came from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to look. Ambassador Velkith walked down the center aisle. She moved slowly, her silver skin reflecting the lights above. Behind her came a holographic projection of a human. Female in military uniform, Admiral Kira Okonkwo. The chamber erupted again. Delegates jumped to their feet. Security forces moved forward with weapons drawn. But Velkith raised her hand and kept walking. I invited them, she said simply. I asked the humans for help against the Vorithax. They have answered. Counselor Drethmar stepped forward. His old body shook with anger. You had no authority to make such contact. The quarantine exists for a reason. Humanity is dangerous beyond measure. The Vorithax have destroyed 4 of my worlds, Velkith replied. They have killed 14 billion of my people. The assembly did nothing. You sent observers while my children were being eaten alive. Her voice grew harder. I had no choice. Admiral Okonkwo's hologram flickered slightly as she spoke. The ambassador acted out of desperation, not malice. My people understand desperation. We have felt it many times in our history. High Chancellor Morathon studied the human with careful eyes. Admiral, your fleet is larger than anything we have ever seen. Our combined military numbers, less than 5,000 ships. You have brought 42,000. You must understand why this concerns us. I understand perfectly. The Admiral's face showed no emotion. You are afraid we have come to conquer you. You are afraid we are no different from the Vorithax, are you? The Admiral was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, but somehow more frightening. Let me tell you about humanity, Chancellor. For most of our history, we were our own worst enemies. We fought wars over land, over resources, over ideas. We built weapons capable of destroying our entire world, and we came close to using them more than once. The fleet I've brought here was not built to fight aliens. It was built to fight ourselves. A murmur ran through the chamber. Drethmar leaned forward. You built 42,000 warships to use against your own kind? We built more than that. What I have brought is only part of our navy. The rest remains in our home system, in case this is a trap. The Admiral smiled coldly. Humanity learned long ago that the universe is cruel. We prepared for the worst. We built ships and weapons and trained soldiers, always expecting that one day we would need them. But you stopped fighting each other, Velkith said. Your records show you have been at peace for over a century. We made a choice. We looked at all our hatred and violence and decided we did not want to destroy ourselves. So we put down our weapons and learned to live together. The Admiral's eyes swept across the chamber. But we never forgot how to fight. We never dismantled our fleets. We simply waited for a worthy enemy. High Chancellor Morathon felt a chill run down his spine. He had lived for 400 years. He had seen empires rise and fall. But he had never encountered anything like this. A species that had built the greatest military force in galactic history. Not out of ambition or greed, but out of pure survival instinct. A species that had enough weapons to conquer everything and had chosen not to use them until now. The Vorithax, Marithox said slowly. You consider them a worthy enemy? They consume innocent worlds. They destroy entire species for food. They have never shown mercy, never accepted surrender, never left survivors. Admiral Okonkwo's voice turned hard as iron. Yes, they are worthy of everything we have built. Counselor Drethmar stepped forward again. His scales had gone pale with shock. Admiral, I must ask, if we had not quarantined your people, if we had welcomed you into the assembly, would you have shared this power with us? The Admiral looked at him for a long moment. You quarantined us because we frightened you. You looked at our history and saw only blood and fire. You never asked why we fought so hard. You never understood that we fought because we refused to die. She turned to address the entire chamber. My people do not hold grudges. The past is the past. What matters now is the future, and in that future, the Vorathax must be stopped. Not pushed back. Not contained. Stopped. Permanently. And after the Vorathax are gone? Morathan asked. What then? Admiral Okonkwo looked at him with those cold, hard eyes. Then we go home. We have no interest in ruling your galaxy. We have our own worlds, our own people, our own problems. She paused. But know this. We will remember who asked for help and who stood by while innocents died. We will remember who treated us as monsters and who treated us as equals. The chamber was silent. Velkith stepped forward and stood beside the Admiral's hologram. The humans have agreed to fight the Vorathax without payment. They ask for nothing in return except the right to be left in peace after the war is over. And if we refuse their help, someone asked from the back of the chamber. The Admiral answered before Velkith could speak. Then we go home and wait. The Vorathax will continue their advance. Eventually, they will reach your core worlds. Your 5,000 ships will fight bravely, and they will lose. And when the swarm comes for you, you will remember this moment. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. You will remember that help was offered, and you were too proud to take it. No one spoke. High Chancellor Morathan looked around the chamber at the frightened faces of 100 species. Then he looked at the human admiral, this small creature from a quarantined world who commanded more military power than the entire assembly combined. Very well, he said at last. The assembly accepts humanity's assistance. May the stars have mercy on the Vorathax, because I do not believe you will. Bronco nodded once. Smart choice. She cut the transmission, and somewhere in the darkness of space, 42,000 human warships changed course toward Vorathax territory. The hunt was about to begin. The Vorathax swarm had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. They had consumed over 200 species. They had destroyed civilizations that were ancient when humanity was still living in caves. In all that time, they had never known defeat. They had never known fear. The Overmind sat at the center of the swarm, connected to every ship and every soldier through a web of thought. It was not one creature, but millions, all thinking together as one. It had memories stretching back thousands of years. It remembered every world it had eaten, every species it had erased from existence. When reports came of a new fleet approaching E3 Prime, the Overmind felt only hunger. More ships meant more biomass. More soldiers meant more food. The swarm would consume them, just like all the others. 3,000 Vorathax warships moved to intercept the enemy. They were living things, grown from flesh and bone and dark organic matter. Each one was a creature in itself, connected to the Overmind, following its will without question. They had never failed. The enemy fleet was smaller, only 800 ships. The Overmind calculated that the battle would last less than an hour. Then they would harvest the remains and continue their feast on the Ethor's worlds. But something was wrong. The enemy ships were not slowing down. They were not forming defensive positions. They were not trying to retreat or negotiate. They were accelerating. Straight toward the swarm, Captain Marcus Chen stood on the bridge of the destroyer, Wrath of Terra, and watched the Vorathax fleet grow larger on his screen. He was a small man with gray hair and scars on his face from battles long past. He had fought in 3 wars before humanity found peace. He had killed and nearly been killed more times than he could count. He had never felt more alive than he did at this moment. All ships. This is Captain Chen, he said into his communicator. The enemy ahead of us has never faced a real fight. They have spent 10,000 years eating people who could not fight back. They think they are predators. He paused and smiled. Let us show them what a real predator looks like. Human vanguard roared forward. The Vorathax opened fire first. Streams of acid and biological projectiles shot across space toward the human ships. It was the same attack that had broken 100 fleets before. Ships would melt. Crews would die screaming. The swarm would feast, but the human ships did not melt. Energy shields flared to life around every vessel. Blocking the acid attacks, point defense systems activated, filling space with thousands of small explosions as they destroyed incoming projectiles. The Vorathak's weapons, which had never failed before, did nothing. Then the humans fired back. The first volley was kinetic rounds. Simple metal projectiles accelerated to incredible speeds by electromagnetic rails. They crossed the distance between the fleets in seconds and slammed into the Vorathaks. Bioships with devastating force, the Overmind felt the deaths of 100 ships in a single instant. It was like losing 100 fingers at once. Pain flooded through the collective consciousness. This was impossible. No species had ever hurt the swarm like this. But the humans were not finished. The second volley was missiles. Not simple explosives, but antimatter warheads designed to destroy matter itself. They punched through the living hulls of Vorathak's ships and detonated inside, turning flesh and bone into pure energy. Entire vessels vanished in flashes of blinding light, the Overmind screamed. Across the psychic network. Retreat. Fall. Back. Regroup. But the humans were too. Fast Captain Chen pushed his ship directly into the center of the Vorathak's formation. His crew worked in perfect coordination, firing weapons in every direction. Railguns tore through enemy ships. Laser batteries burned holes in organic armor. Nuclear torpedoes turned the void into a sea of fire. Around him, the other human ships did the same. They moved like wolves among sheep, striking from every angle, never staying still long enough to be targeted. They showed no fear. They showed no mercy. The Vorathaks tried to fight back. They launched swarms of smaller creatures, living missiles designed to latch on to enemy ships and eat through their hulls. But the human point defense systems destroyed them by the thousands. The sky was filled with tiny explosions as the swarms died before they could reach their targets. They tried to ram the human ships, sacrificing themselves to take enemies with them. But the humans simply moved out of the way. Their ships were faster, more agile, more responsive than anything the Vorathaks had ever seen. They tried to flee, but the humans chased them down, destroying every ship that turned to run. In 47 minutes, it was over. 3,000 Vorathaks warships had been reduced to floating debris. The human vanguard had lost 12 vessels. 12 out of 800. The Overmind could not understand what had happened. For the first time in 10,000 years, it felt something cold spreading through its collective mind. It took a moment to recognize the sensation. Fear. What were these creatures? Where had they come from? The Overmind searched its ancient memories for anything similar and found nothing. No species had ever fought like this. No species had ever moved with such coordination, such precision, such absolute commitment to destruction. It reached out to the last surviving scout ship, demanding answers. What are they? What do they call themselves? The scout had managed to intercept some of the enemy communications. Strange sounds that meant nothing to the Vorathaks. But there was one word that appeared again and again in their transmissions. A word they used to describe themselves, humans, and another word. A word that seemed to define their entire approach to combat. Predators. The scout ship tried to transmit more information, but a human destroyer appeared beside it without warning. The Vorathaks vessel had no time to react. Railgun rounds tore through its hull. And then there was only silence. The Overmind pulled its consciousness back, trying to process what had happened. 3,000 ships destroyed in less than an hour. It had never lost so many so quickly. It had never lost at all, and this was only the beginning. Reports flooded in from across Vorathak's territory. More human fleets had been detected. Not hundreds of ships, but thousands. Tens of thousands. They were spreading out, moving toward every Vorathak's position at once. The Overmind realized, with growing horror, that the force it had just faced was not an army. It was a scouting party, a test. The humans had sent less than 1,000 ships to see how the Vorathaks would fight. Now they knew. On the bridge of the Wrath of Terra, Captain Chen received a message from Admiral Okonkwo. The main fleet had entered Vorathak's space. The full offensive was beginning. "Captain, you have done well," the Admiral said. "Your attack has given us all the information we need. The Vorathaks are tough, but they are not prepared for us. They have never faced an enemy that fights back. What are your orders, Admiral? There was a pause. When Okonkwo spoke again, her voice was cold as the void itself.
How mercy.
No prisoners. We end this. Chen nodded and turned to his crew. They were tired and bloody, but their eyes were bright with purpose. They had joined the military hoping they would never have to fight. Now that the fight had come, they discovered something about themselves. They were good at it, you heard the Admiral Chen said. The Vorathaks have spent 10,000 years thinking they were the monsters of this galaxy. It is time to show them they were wrong. He looked out at the stars, where the burning remains of 3,000 enemy ships drifted in the darkness. We are the monsters now. The human fleet moved deeper into enemy territory, and behind them, the Vorathaks learned a lesson they would never forget. Some prey bites back. Admiral Kira Okonkwo stood before the holographic map of Vorathak space and studied it like a hunter studying tracks in the snow. Red dots marked enemy positions. Blue dots marked her own forces. There were far more blue dots than red. For 10,000 years, the Vorathaks had been the hunters. They had chased species across the stars and devoured them one by one. They had never been hunted themselves. That was about to change. All fleet commanders, this is Admiral Okonkwo, she said into her communicator. The enemy is scattered and confused. They do not understand what is happening to them. They have never faced a coordinated attack on this scale. She paused. Do not give them time to learn. Strike hard. Strike fast. Leave nothing alive. The human fleet split into 7 battle groups, each one commanded by an officer who had spent their entire life preparing for war. They spread out across Vorathok's territory like fingers closing into a fist. General Yuki Tanaka led the 2nd Fleet toward a cluster of enemy ships hiding near an asteroid field. She was a small woman, with sharp eyes and a mind like a computer. She had studied every battle in human history, and many that were not human at all. She knew exactly how to destroy an enemy who thought they were safe. The Vorathaks had gathered 6,000 ships in the asteroid field. They believed the rocks would protect them from attack. They believed they could hide and regroup and plan their counterattack. They were wrong, General. Tanaka split her fleet into 2 groups. The first group approached from the front, firing weapons and drawing the enemy's attention. The Vorathaks turned to face them, preparing to fight. They did not see the second group coming from behind. 2,000 human ships appeared on the opposite side of the asteroid field, trapping the Vorathaks between 2 walls of fire. The enemy tried to flee through the gaps in the rocks, but Tanaka had anticipated this. Her engineers had spent 12 hours placing mines in every escape route. When the Vorathak ships tried to run, they flew straight into explosions. The battle lasted for hours. When it was over, 6,000 Vorathak ships were debris. General Tanaka had lost 200 vessels. She reported her victory to Admiral Okonkwo and immediately moved to her next target. On the other side of Vorathak's territory, Admiral Pavel Volkov was pioneering a new way to kill the enemy. He was an old man with a white beard and eyes that had seen too much death. He had lost his family to violence long ago, and he had spent his life learning how to deliver violence in return. The Vorathaks had gathered a large force near one of their breeding worlds. 8,000 ships protecting the next generation of the swarm. They had arranged themselves in a tight defensive formation. Ready to meet any attack, Volkov did not attack from outside. His fleet made a faster-than-light jump directly into the center of the enemy formation. The Vorathaks had never seen anything like it. Human ships appeared among them without warning, so close that they could not fire without hitting their own vessels. The tight defensive formation that was supposed to protect them became a trap. They could not move without crashing into each other. Volkov's ships opened fire in every direction at once. At this range, they could not miss. Vorathak's vessels exploded by the dozens, then by the hundreds. The survivors tried to scatter, but there was nowhere to go. Human ships were everywhere, filling space with death. When it was over, Admiral Volkov had lost 800 ships. The Vorathaks had lost all 8,000. He looked at the burning remains of the breeding world below and felt nothing. These creatures had consumed entire species. They had eaten children and laughed as civilizations burned. They deserved no mercy. He ordered his fleet to move on. There were more enemies to kill, but the most devastating blow came from Commodore Amara Osei and the Seventh Fleet. Osei was a scientist before she was a soldier. She believed that the best weapon was not always the biggest gun or the fastest ship. Sometimes the best weapon was an idea. Her fleet had captured several Vorathax ships during the first battles. While other commanders were planning attacks, she had her scientists studying the enemy. They examined Vorathax flesh. They analyzed Vorathax blood. They mapped the genetic code that made the swarm what it was, and they found a weakness. The Vorathax were all connected. Every creature in the swarm shared the same basic biology. What hurt one could hurt all. A disease that infected one ship could spread to every ship in the fleet. Commodore Osei ordered her scientists to create such a disease. It took them 3 days. When they were finished, they had created a virus specifically designed to destroy Vorathax tissue. It would spread through their psychic network, jumping from mind to mind, ship to ship. It would eat them from the inside. The Seventh Fleet loaded the virus into special missiles and fired them at the nearest Vorathax formation. The effect was immediate and horrifying. Vorathax ships began to rot in space. Their living hulls turned black and fell apart. Creatures inside screamed as their bodies dissolved. The infection spread faster than thought. Jumping through the psychic links that connected the swarm, the Overmind felt its children dying by the millions. It tried to cut the infected ships from the network, but it was too late. The virus had already reached too far. Entire fleets went silent. Worlds that had been conquered centuries ago began to die, for the first time in its existence. The Overmind knew true terror. It gathered what remained of its strength and sent a message on all frequencies. A surrender. A plea for mercy. It would stop the conquest. It would retreat to its home territory. It would never threaten the galaxy again. It only asked to be allowed to survive. The message reached Admiral Okonkwo on her flagship. She read it once, then read it again. Her officers watched her face for some sign of what she was thinking. She felt nothing. "Admiral," said her communications officer, "the Vorathax are offering unconditional surrender. They are willing to accept any terms we demand." Okonkwo looked at the holographic map. She looked at the thousands of worlds the Vorathax had consumed. She thought about the billions of innocent beings who had died screaming while the swarm fed on their flesh. "They consumed worlds," she said quietly. "They exterminated species that had done nothing to harm them. They killed children for food." She turned to her officer. "Do you think they offered mercy to their victims? Do you think they accepted surrender from the people they ate?" The officer did not answer. He did not need to. Okonkwo opened a channel to all human ships. "Admiral Okonkwo, the Vorathax have offered to surrender. I have considered their offer." Her voice was cold and hard. "I have rejected it. They are a disease that has plagued this galaxy for 10,000 years. Today, we cure that disease. All ships, continue the attack. Do not stop until the swarm is gone." She closed the channel. The human fleet continued its advance. Ships burned across 1,000 light years. The Overmind screamed and begged and pleaded, but no one was listening anymore. On the bridge of her flagship, Okonkwo watched the destruction with empty eyes. She knew that some would call her a monster for refusing surrender. She knew that history might judge her harshly. She did not care. Some evils were too great to forgive. Some enemies were too dangerous to leave alive. The Vorathax had shown the galaxy what they were through 10,000 years of slaughter. Now humanity was showing the galaxy what it was. Justice without mercy. Destruction without end. A species that remembered every wrong and repaid it. With interest, the swarm had wanted predators. They had found them. The war lasted 91 days. In that time, the human fleet destroyed every Vorathax warship, burned every Vorathax breeding world, and hunted down every last fragment of the swarm that tried to flee into the darkness between stars. 10,000 years of conquest ended in less than 3 months. The Overmind died screaming. Its final thoughts echoed across the psychic void. a cry of disbelief and terror that faded into silence. The creature that had consumed 200 species and ruled a quarter of the galaxy was gone, erased from existence by beings it had never even heard of before. The galaxy was free, Ambassador. Velketh stood in the great chamber of the Galactic Assembly and looked around at the faces of 100 species. She remembered the last time she had stood here, begging for help that never came. She remembered the fear and the despair and the certainty that her people were going to die. Now, she stood beside Admiral Kira Okonkwo, and everything had changed. The chamber was silent. No one knew what to say. The assembly had watched the war from a safe distance, too afraid to help, too proud to admit they were wrong. Now, they had to face the beings who had saved them all. High Chancellor Morthan rose from his seat. His 6 arms hung limp at his sides, and his ancient face showed something Velketh had never seen before. Humility. Admiral Okonkwo, he said. On behalf of the Galactic Assembly, I wish to express our gratitude. You have done what we believed impossible. You have ended a threat that has haunted this galaxy for 10,000 years. Okonkwo nodded but said nothing. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, her face showing no emotion. She looked tired. Velketh knew she had not slept more than a few hours at a time during the entire war. She had carried the weight of 42,000 ships and millions of soldiers on her shoulders. But she had won. Counselor Drethmer stepped forward. The old Veloci looked smaller than before, as if the war had shrunk him somehow. His scales had lost their shine, and his eyes were filled with something that might have been shame. We owe you more than gratitude, he said. We owe you an apology. For generations we feared your kind. We quarantined your world and called you savages. We believed you were monsters. He paused. We were wrong, were you? Okonkwo asked. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the silent chamber. We destroyed an entire species in 91 days. We refused their surrender. We hunted them until none remained. She looked at Drethmar with those cold, hard eyes. Perhaps you were right to fear us. The chamber stirred. Delegates whispered to each other. Some looked afraid. Others looked confused. They had expected the humans to be proud of their victory. They had not expected this. Velketh stepped forward. She had come to know the Admiral during the war. She had watched her make impossible decisions and carry terrible burdens. She understood something about humanity that the Assembly did not. Admiral Okonkwo did what had to be done, Velketh said. The Varathaks would never have stopped. They could not be reasoned with or contained. They would have consumed this entire galaxy if someone had not stopped them. She looked around the chamber. None of us were willing to pay the price. Humanity paid it for us. And what price was that? Asked a delegate from the back. Okonkwo answered before Velketh could speak. 847 ships. 42,000 soldiers. 42,000 human lives lost fighting a war that was not ours. Her voice cracked slightly. They were young. Most of them had never fired a weapon before this war. They joined the military hoping they would never have to fight. And they died far from home, protecting people they had never met. The chamber was silent again. Velketh saw tears on the Admiral's face. It was the first emotion she had shown since the war began. Do not mistake us, Okonkwo continued. We do not regret what we did. The Varathaks earned their fate through 10,000 years of cruelty. But do not think it was easy. Do not think we enjoyed it. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Humanity knows the cost of war better than any species in this galaxy. We have paid it many times. We will always pay it when we must. But we do not pay it lightly. High Chancellor Morthan bowed his head. Then we are doubly in your debt. You saved us and suffered for it. What can we offer in return? Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady again. We want only one thing. We want to be left in peace. We did not come here seeking power or territory. We came because innocent people were dying and no one else would help them. She looked around the chamber. When the last of our dead have been honored, and the last of our wounded have healed, we will return to our own space. We ask only that you remember what happened here. Remember that when you needed help, we came. Remember that we asked for nothing in return. And if we wish for more than that, Morathan asked, if we wish to welcome humanity into the assembly as full members, if we wish to build an alliance that will ensure this never happens again, Okonkwo considered the offer. For a moment, Velkith saw something flicker across her face. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just exhaustion. That would be acceptable, the Admiral said finally. But understand this. We will not change who we are. We are a violent species. We have war in our blood and fire in our hearts. We have learned to control it, but we will never be rid of it. She paused. If you welcome us into your assembly, you welcome all of us. The good and the bad. The builders and the destroyers. The poets and the soldiers. I understand, Morathan said. And we accept. The vote was unanimous. For the first time in history, every species in the Galactic Assembly agreed on something. Humanity was welcomed, not as a threat to be contained, but as a member to be respected. After the ceremony, Velkith found Admiral Okonkwo standing alone on a balcony overlooking the stars. The human woman looked older than she had 3 months ago. The war had taken something from her that she would never get back. What happens now? Velkith asked. Okonkwo did not turn around. Now we rebuild. Your worlds. Our fleet. The trust that was broken long before the Vorathox came. She sighed. It will take time. But time is something we have now, thanks to the sacrifice of better people than me. Velkith stood beside her and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the ashes of the Vorax swarm were drifting in the void. Somewhere out there, the worlds they had consumed were beginning to heal. You could have conquered us, Velkith said quietly. You had the power. No one could have stopped you. Yes, Okonkwo agreed. We could have, but conquest is easy. Any species can destroy. We did enough of that to ourselves over the centuries. She finally turned to look at Velkith. We decided long ago that we wanted to be more than conquerors. We wanted to be protectors, builders, the kind of species that others could count on when everything seemed hopeless. And are you? That kind of species. Okonkwo smiled. It was a small smile, tired and sad, but real.
No.
We are trying to be. Every day, we are trying. Velkith reached out and took the Admiral's hand. It was a human gesture she had learned during the war, a sign of friendship and trust. Then perhaps that is enough, she said. Perhaps trying is all any of us can do. They stood together in silence, two beings from different worlds. Watching the stars that humanity had helped to save, the galaxy was not perfect. It would never be perfect. There would be new threats and new challenges and new wars to fight. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the people of the galaxy did not have to face them alone. Humanity had come, and humanity remembered what it was like to be. Small and afraid and alone in the darkness they would make. Sure, no one else had to feel that way ever again.